Evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Peterson. I'm president of the Village Preservation and Improvement Society. We just call it VPIS. I want to thank all the candidates for agreeing to participate in this forum and for providing written responses to VPIS's questions. Background information on the candidates for both City Council and School Board, as well as their responses to written questions, can be found in a booklet posted on the VPIS website. That's www.vpis.org. I also want to thank our great partners, the League of Women Voters of Falls Church, for joining us in co-sponsoring this forum. And to remind everyone that the recording for tonight's forum will be posted on the VPIS website in the next couple of days. With that, I'd like to turn it to the League of Women Voters.
I'm Allison Brown from League of Women Voters Falls Church. We welcome you tonight, and we're very happy to be partnering with VPIS to put on this forum. Early voting has already started. You can vote at City Hall Monday through Friday. Early voting will also be available 2 Saturdays before the election, and then the vote will be on Tuesday, November 2nd. So we encourage you to vote and to listen to the candidates tonight, and we'll hear answers to a series of questions. If you have your own questions, put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And the last half hour, we will be relaying questions from the audience to the candidates. And the last thing I'll say is that we are having a forum for school board candidates a week from tonight. So please tune in again a week from tonight. And I will hand you off to our moderators, who are Keith Thurston from VPIS and Annie Rhodes Klein from League of Women Voters Falls Church. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you. We'll begin the questioning with a reminder that we've told the candidates that we are rotating the questions so that different persons each time as we go through. And we have we're starting the question with Mary Beth Conley, and the question is, describe your background and why it makes you well suited for being on the City Council and what your priorities would be. We'll allow 2 minutes for your answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here tonight. Thanks to the League and to VPIS for hosting this candidate forum. It's interesting to do it online. I wish I could see all of your faces so that I could smile at the people in the crowd that I know and greet those that I don't know. But here we are in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So my background, I've served for 2 terms on City Council already. That's 8 years so far. Prior to that, I started working for Falls Church City Public Schools back in 2005 as the community outreach director. And it was a great job while I raised my 3 kids with my husband, Michael, here in Falls Church. And I really was connected to what was going on in the community because it was my job to know people and introduce them to the schools. And I worked with a lot of different businesses and groups and organizations. So 8 years ago, I decided that I should run for City Council. There was a need for someone with my experience and my knowledge of how the city worked. And I ran and got onto City Council, and it was a great learning curve because it's really different to be on City Council as a member as opposed to being someone watching City Council meetings and having lots of thoughts about how things should be. So one of my favorite things about working on City Council are the colleagues that I have and the people that we work with, because everyone brings so many strengths to the job. And there are 7 members of City Council, and each one of us has a different viewpoint and don't always get along or want to emphasize one thing or another thing. So collaboration is one of my strengths, and I think that is one of the reasons why I enjoy being on City Council so much. And then additionally, I really believe in what a wonderful place Falls Church is. It's much better now than it was when we moved, my family and I moved here. And I would like to be part of keeping it improving and getting better as we go forward. So I look forward to chatting with you tonight.
Councilwoman Shantz Hiscock.
Hi, good evening, and thanks to VPIS and to the League of Women Voters for hosting us this evening. And I'd like to thank my council colleagues for all of your support and encouragement of me in the past year on council. And I'd like to thank Caroline and Scott and Stuart for stepping up to run for city council as well. It's a job just to go through this process for sure. My name is Debbie Sean Hiscott, and I've lived and worked and volunteered and raised my family here in Falls Church City over the past 25 plus years. I've spent the past year serving on city council, specifically in the role of liaison to the Environmental Sustainability Council, the Architectural Advisory Board, and the Library Oversight Board. I was also recently elected the chair of the Community Development Authority for the West Falls Church Project. And I serve with my colleague Councilman Snyder on the Legislative Committee. Regionally, I serve on the Chesapeake Bay Water Policy Committee and the Climate and Energy Committee and the Human Services and Public Safety Committees. My professional background is actually in corporate finance and business development and contract negotiations for Fortune 500 companies. The last 9 years of my career, however, I spent right here in Falls Church City as the executive director of the independent nonprofit, the Falls Church Education Foundation, and worked to disperse in the past couple of years alone over $1 million in support of our public schools and our students and families and teachers there. In the pandemic alone, I've helped raise over $120,000 in support for our Family Assistance Fund, primarily for food assistance and emergency supplies and medical and housing for members of our community. If re-elected, I will focus on several different areas, one of which is the West Falls Church development. I spent 17 plus years working on facilities and promoting the building of a new high school. And I really look forward to the moral and financial responsibility of being able to.
Could you say that question again, please?
Scott,
You want me to just finish my?
Scott, we'll come back to you if you could please finish, Debbie.
I'll just continue to focus on the West Falls Church development, on equity issues, affordable housing, environmental policy, and infrastructure with our ARPA funds.
Can you
and
hear me
smart
now?
growth. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight, and I hope you'll consider
The next person in the lineup is candidate Leon.
Yes. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for participating tonight. I see there's 60 attendees on this Zoom call, and I know you have your choice of community meetings between the PTA, City Center Walk at 6, and then you've got this. So it's a busy night. Love seeing that you're here. I've lived in the city with my family for 15 years. My husband, Andrew, has had family here since 1946. So collectively, we have a long history here in the city. But really, my background and why it makes me, I believe, suited for this position. Let's start with the fact that I'm a full-time working mother who's walked the path of immigrant to permanent resident to citizen. And I believe I bring a unique and diverse perspective to this candidacy. I've also served in executive roles for 13 out of the 26 years that I've been working. Those roles include as COO at DC Public Schools, DC's Office of the Chief Technology Officer, 2 private equity firms, and I'm currently at Freddie Mac. I have experience with large budgets. I've been responsible for $2 billion in multi-year SIP budgets, up to $500 million in operating budgets, and have led divisions of about up to 300 employees. I have served in public-facing positions and, developed pilots as well as products and services. I spent the last 5 years at Freddie Mac piloting affordable housing programs, and I have a track record of community service. So in summary, I would bring work and personal experience to the priorities I champion for the city, which are excellent schools, expanding affordable housing, and supporting economic development while preserving green space. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Snyder.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks to the Village Preservation and Improvement Society and the League of Women Voters and all the people that are listening or tuning in now and in the future. You really are what make this community great. I was brought up in a small town, a lot like Falls Church, in the coal regions in Western Pennsylvania. my parents were deeply involved in the life of that community. And so I guess it's very much a part of me to give back to the community that has given me so much. We're really here because my wife, Edie, was smart enough to recognize the value of Falls Church. And I quickly fell in love with it as well. Our kids graduated K through 12 and were extremely well prepared for their futures by the Falls Church schools. And I guess the first thing I want to make sure is that every other kid has that same opportunity that my kids did. And so part of why I entered public life in the city of Falls Church was to make sure that other kids had that same opportunity that mine did. The second reason is being brought up in a small town where the volunteer fire chief was one of the most prominent people in town. The critical importance of essential public services is something that I have always dedicated my focus on and will continue to in the future. We create governments for fundamental reasons, such as providing for public safety, police, fire, transportation. And those are the things that I've committed to in the past and plan to in the future. US News and World Report ranked the city of Falls Church third best out of 3,000 cities in America. Now, I want to be first best, but being third best out of 3,000 reflects the marvelous community that this is. And I want to contribute to that, protect that, and meet our new challenges, particularly in the area of transportation, emergency preparedness, and social services. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to candidate Whitaker.
Good evening. Well, I was privileged to grow up in the middle class. My father was a social worker running children's homes, so I was exposed to and aware from an early age of people who were less privileged than I was. I've worked in blue-collar jobs, I've worked in white-collar jobs. I'm a financial economist by training and have worked in the private sector in the US and internationally. In 2008, the industry I was working in, Yellow Pages and Directory Assistance, imploded for three reasons. First was the Great Recession. Second and third were the introduction of the iPhone and the development of Google. After listening to Al Gore and the IPCC, I decided to focus my efforts on climate in general and on transportation in particular. I've worked with a number of organizations such as the Sierra Club, participated in numerous civic meetings, met with numerous elected officials, published editorials in the Washington Post on climate change and transportation. One of the things that economics teaches us is that there is a scarcity of resources. We can't have it all. We can, however, often achieve reasonable goals if we focus on them. I believe we need to bring greater focus to climate change and social justice. Regarding climate change, Falls Church City, like many other areas throughout the world, has failed to achieve its own greenhouse gas emissions targets. There are also other social justice targets that we've missed. The Falls Church affordable living policy has been described as being significantly off track. Our transportation infrastructure is de facto segregated. While the city is the least racially diverse community in the region, 81% of Metro bus riders are minorities and 46% are lower income. I'm running for the city council to help focus on climate change and social justice matters. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Diaz.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I was trying to use some different technology and I made a mistake there. I wanted to thank VPIS and the League of Women Voters and the other candidates and the citizens who are listening in for attending this evening. I think this is great, and it shows that there's a lot of support for local government. Now, I'm new to the community, and I think I have a new perspective and a fresh perspective for Falls Church. I've spent my career in the military, living around the world and around the US. And with that career behind me, I have a new career ahead here in the area. And now that I'm part of a community, I want to contribute at home. So I've not run for public office before. The military has a way of moving you around and leaving you in places where you don't have a long enough time to really become a member of the community. You can be a Boy Scout leader, you can teach a sports team for your children, you can go to PTA meetings, but 2 or 3 years later, you're moving again and you really don't get a chance to participate in local events. Moving here to Falls Church in 2019 was a deliberate choice by my family. We had about a year to prepare for a move to the area, and we looked far and wide for the type of community that my wife and I lived up in. A small community with walkability. We were looking for a great school system, and we were looking for neighborhoods that were had tree-lined streets, had access to public transportation, and felt like home and like where we grew up. The issues that I see with Falls Church is, growing our city shouldn't be at the expense of the single-family homes and the small businesses that fund the city coffers. We're the victims of our own success. Our location is desirable, and our school system drives others to want to live here also. Unfortunately, we have some constraints. We're a small city, and we've got nowhere to go but up. Development plans in the city call for, over the next decade, call for hundreds of apartments and condominiums to be built along Broad Street, with bringing thousands of new residents and possibly hundreds of new school children to the area. Our city needs to be able to grow in a managed pace. We need to maintain our city charm, and we need to support those who live here and enjoy what the community has to offer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll move to question 2.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so question 2, we are starting with candidate Diaz. You are first. Question 2, Falls Church has been experiencing significant new development recently. Could you please talk about your views and preferred approach to future development, including your thoughts on pace, planning, and how to mitigate negative impacts, as well as how to measure promised positive impacts? And it's candidate Diaz, you're starting.
Great, thank you. I've been sitting for the past year under COVID and reading city council notes and looking at the development efforts in the city. And I was surprised to see that the level of interest that everyone has with the developments, whether it's Founders Row 1, Founders Row 2, West Falls Church, the possibility of something being at Broad and Washington. It seems like a great amount of development for such a small city. And my concern when I look at those plans is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to replace, smaller size buildings with huge stone, glass, and steel facades that face on very narrow streets that at one time were tree lined. I think we need to develop, but I think our development needs to be a little bit better managed. We need to retain the charm of the city. We need to have better setbacks. We need to offer green spaces for our community. And we need to avoid looking like downtown Clarendon or some of those other areas along the orange and silver lines that are just steel and glass. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you, candidate Diaz. Next, it is to you, Council Member Shans Hiscott. Would you like me to reread the question?
I think I have it. Thank you very much, though. I appreciate that. Regarding the pace of development, having lived here for 25 years and thinking about what Falls Church City looked like when I moved here, which included, in terms of places to go out to eat, you could go to the Red Lobster, or you could go to the Burger King on Broad Street. There were several areas of Broad Street that didn't have anything happening on them, literally and figuratively. And so I know that a lot of the planning for some of the big projects that are currently happening right now started 20 plus years ago. So in terms of pace, I think it feels faster than it may really be in reality because of the length of time it's taking for planning for those spaces. I've really enjoyed working with our boards and commissions. I think our boards and commissions have a tremendous amount of expertise in all types of areas, especially the Environmental Sustainability Council. And I've really enjoyed learning from them and listening to them about their guidelines on how to develop, specifically our secondary criteria about electric vehicles and everything else. I think there are a lot of positive impacts to growth, but I really look forward to working with our boards and commissions to ensure that it's done well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, it is going to candidate Leanne. Would you like me to reread the question?
Oops, sorry, I had to unmute. Yes, one more time. It was embedded 3 things.
There's more than one thing in there. Okay, sure. So here it comes again. The question is, Falls Church has been experiencing significant new development recently.
Mhm.
Could you please talk about your views and preferred approach to future development, including your thoughts on pace, planning, how to mitigate negative impacts, as well as measure promised positive impacts?
Sure, thank you for reading that. I am very appreciative of all the effort that has gone, that the city has started into affordable housing. So I believe that the pace right now is one that is welcome. The approach that we have to support affordable housing is a great start. I think that there are opportunities, to increase that. I do think that we need to measure our impacts on green spaces. We need a balance not only in development, commercial, but in single family residential. I want to make sure that we don't blame one for the other, right? When it comes to preservation of green space and tree canopy, the low interest rates have fueled increase in tear downs just because of low interest rates. So we need to make sure we preserve that green space, and we want to make sure that we manage the type of mix on housing so that it balances the pressure on public service costs. Just building apartments does not mean that we put pressure on public service costs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Leanne. All right. Next, we are going to Council Member Snyder. Would you like me to reread the question?
No, thanks very much. So the major reason for the large scale mixed use developments was to diversify our tax base, a tax base that's too much focused on residential without much commercial would create long-term sustainability, financial sustainability issues for the city. So that's why we originally embarked on this. And when you look around, you frankly see a more walkable community with many choices. I'd like to see more. Working in the private sector as I do, I'm a pretty tough negotiator. And so some of the projects have come out nearly what I would like and others not. And I've not been afraid to argue for changes and even to vote down projects that I don't think are in the public interest. But we're making real progress in a lot of ways. First of all, I fully support the increase in the ADU percentages, and we can go even higher. These developments have provided some key funding for the schools and libraries that I support. But I also want to make sure that it works for the surrounding neighborhoods and works in a larger sense for transportation and climate issues. And we're doing better at that, and I hope we'll do even better in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next, we are moving to candidate Whitaker. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I think I've got it. I'm unmuted. I think there are a couple of ways to address the issue of housing shortage, which is clearly a nationwide wide problem. I appreciate much of the development that is going on in Falls Church City. I also support the idea of increasing something called upzoning, which would allow people to build ADUs on their property. I'm particularly concerned, though, about the transportation effect of all the new people and developments that is going to occur here in the city. I think there's going to be a lot more traffic, and we need to have some way to address that as well.
Thank you. Okay, so next we are turning to Vice Mayor Connolly. Would you like me to repeat the question?
Oh, I got the question. Thank you. So as I said in my opening statement, Falls Church is a better place to live now than it was when I moved here. more than 20 years ago. And a lot of that is because of the mixed use development that we have added. As Ms. Hiscott said, the pace of it, if you just have arrived in Falls Church, it may seem like the pace is really fast, but the pace is slow. There may be 10 mixed use buildings that have gone in 20 years. So it's not a fast pace. And the city council goes through a very, very detailed review of every submission to make sure that there's financial benefit to the city, there's green space benefit, there's stormwater benefit. We've had lots of funding for our schools through capital contributions, as well as to our library and our parks and affordable housing. So it's a whole package. You can't just look at it as, how does that one development look? It really is a big picture package. And I think that in the net, it's a good thing.
Thank you. All right, so Keith, I think I'm turning it back to you for the next question.
So we're on to question number 3. And the question is, how would you recommend that the city utilize the COVID funds that it received from the federal government? And this time we're starting with Councilman Sean Hiscock.
Thank you. I believe you're referring are you referring to the ARPA funds, American Recovery Plan Act funds, most recent ones?
That's right.
Okay. So we are, this is a once in a generation opportunity for us to use these federally allocated funds to the betterment of our little city. And I, like several of my colleagues, are very much in favor of using this where we can for our infrastructure. And by that, I mean, whatever we can use, there are very many specifics and laws around how we can use these funds. However, there are going to be many opportunities for roads, sidewalks, undergrounding, green and gray stormwater infrastructure that are really going to help us in the short term and in the long term address a lot of our stormwater management needs and our transportation needs. And we can use those dollars really effectively by doing that now and not having to take out bonds and then pay debt services on those bonds for our improved infrastructure. So I'm very much in favor of starting at the top and starting on the 6 projects that we have outlined and moving on from there and using those funds really well. And like I said, avoiding the debt services fees that we would face otherwise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're on to candidate Leanne.
Hi there. Yes, I absolutely believe that use of ARPA funds, if we had to, put a priority on it, definitely around infrastructure for stormwater. And if I understand this correctly, it can be used for building or even upgrading facilities, right? So not just that infrastructure on the roads. Definitely, secondly, around transportation. We have, with all this development comes, ideally we want increased foot traffic. You can't get the increased foot traffic without high density buildings, and Falls Church still, as it has some destination retail. So we need to take a look at traffic calming, particularly in those residential streets. I think complementary to speed limits, we want to take a look at how we can do more monitoring. I think I've seen in Washington, D.C., placement of cameras to leverage, safety for the pedestrians in our city. Thank you.
We're now on to Councilman Snyder.
Thank you. Well, the first thing we need to do is get through this pandemic. And that means whatever money is needed to help our citizens get through it, help our businesses get through it, provide the kind of public health that we need to have. It seems to me this is, after all, pandemic originated funding. So I want to make sure that we bring our community, all elements, and I do mean all elements and all of our citizens, through this pandemic. My hope is that there is light at the end of the tunnel finally. So the rest of the money, I think, ought to be spent, and I share the views of other council members and what you've heard. It should be spent on long-term infrastructure, starting with stormwater. We also have the ability to lower the speed limit given to us by the legislature to start to put the signs up. And we all know, of course, that improving the safety of our streets is not just the speed limit, but involves enforcement and education as well. So in terms of bringing our community through this pandemic, investing in infrastructure, and otherwise using it for transportation issues are all things which I would support using this money for. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Whitaker.
Thank you. So I think there are a couple areas that I would like to see this money spent in. First of all, having to do with providing incentives to increase the percentage of people in Falls Church City that are actually vaccinated. There have been a lot of creative things done elsewhere to provide incentives, including things like awards or something, or drawings where you can be rewarded for actually getting vaccinated. I'd like to see ways to encourage that. With respect to infrastructure, I think there are a couple things infrastructure wise in terms of climate. Number one is clearly we need to invest in stormwater infrastructure to be able to ameliorate the problems that we have. At the same time, on a longer term basis, we need to invest in transportation infrastructure that is going to reduce the emissions of CO2. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Conley.
Thanks. I'd like to echo a lot of what my colleagues, Mr. Snyder and Ms. Hiscott, said regarding the spending of ARPA. We have been talking about this on City Council for a while. And one of the things that we have already received money along the way to help with pandemic. There have been a lot of business support through the EDA, as well as supporting the schools and the city with expenses that have come about because of fighting the pandemic. So I think we need to continue those. We need to find out what the schools need to be able to provide stellar services. And we also need to find out what city staff need. And then I would agree, infrastructure is very important. And the stormwater projects we've been working on them for years. So they're shovel ready. And that is really important and will make a big difference. And then the last thing I'd like to take a look at is sidewalks, because there are so many more people out walking who are home in the daytime that aren't usually home, as well as children walking to schools, and sidewalks would benefit our whole community. So I think sidewalks and crosswalks would be my final priority there.
Thank you. And Candidate Diaz.
Thank you. So I agree with most of what I've heard so far. Stormwater is definitely an issue. I live on a street that will often flood, and I have neighbors who get water in their basement and in their backyards during every large deluge. Traffic calming in our area, I see a lot of fast-moving vehicles on small residential streets. And I think we should have something to calm that traffic, to protect our children and other people walking their dogs and in the neighborhood. Lastly, I think that we need to look at behavioral health care in the city and in the schools. COVID was being at home and teleworking and learning from home was a great strain on our children and our families. And I think the city should invest in some type of behavioral health that could be have outreach within the schools and in the city to negate some of those effects of a year sitting at home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will announce to our audience that you can submit questions. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a icon there that says Q&A. If you click on that, you can put questions in, and we're going to have those towards the end of our evening.
You want me to take the next question, Keith? Okay, I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we're up to the next question. This question is, if elected, how would you ensure decision-making that promotes equity and better represents all communities and minimizes unconscious bias? And we're going to start off with candidate Leanne.
That's a great question. You know, I've spoken at different firms about this just within my profession, and it is an evolving topic. And I do think that it's really important for you know, especially public-facing organizations to have a charter as to what this means, right? So when we look at our boards, I think we've done a great start by putting a task out there to review the mission and purpose of each of these boards and how they ensure equity. I think when we talk about unconscious bias, to be honest, I think there's, it starts with, you know, in order to practice it, I think we all need to understand what that is. I was involved in launching some of that training corporate-wide at Freddie Mac recently. And I do think that there is a benefit to not only having city employees come in and have unconscious bias training. There's some nonprofits that we were involved in at Freddie Mac that did that, as well as providing community forums to discuss that. Oops. That time
Thank
goes
you.
by. Okay, thanks.
Fast. Thank you. Now we're moving to Councilmember Snyder. And I won't ask each time, but if at any point you want me to repeat the question, please let me know.
Well, dealing with unconscious bias really starts with yourself, and it's a constant day-to-day, minute-by-minute work, but it's well worth it at the end, obviously. In City Council, we have asked our boards and commissions for input on how we can redesign our programs to be more fair and more equitable. At the regional level, I've supported major initiatives in that area, including most recently the Council of Governments Board of Directors to combine high volume capability transportation areas with equity areas. So this is something that I have personally committed my own life to, where my family worships in downtown Washington, D.C. was the Church of Abraham Lincoln. Senior minister there walked with Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama. So I've tried to develop the ability to identify and act on bias in my personal life. And it's critically important that we maintain our initiatives at the city, putting everything we do through the equity lens, as well as work regionally. I've tried to do all of those things and will continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, candidate Whitaker. Candidate Whitaker, you're on mute. You're on mute. Can you unmute?
I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes, I certainly appreciate the concern about unconscious bias. I understand it exists. I'm sure I have it, though I do my best to try to understand it and overcome it. I think what we really need to do is to work very hard to bring other voices in, voices that are not like ours, to the process, and to ask, pretty directly the question whether or not the things that we are doing, the policies that we're pursuing, are going to affect everybody equally, or put it in another way, to ask how the policies that we're pursuing are going to have a disparate impact on different groups. I think it's very important that we be asking that question.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Connolly.
Yes, thanks for that question. And equity and unconscious bias is one of those things that is at the forefront of a lot of our minds right now. And as Councilman Snyder said, we did ask the boards and commissions to take a look at the work that they're doing and how the work that they're doing could better reflect equity. So we've had conversations about having a board and commission specifically dedicated to equity. We've also, when we did our budgeting last year, took a look at how are the programs that we're funding serving people that may not have been recognized or served as much in the past, those who have traditionally received less. And I do think the strength of Falls Church is our people, and the ability to have as many people at the table with different needs and be able to listen to one another and understand what those needs are is really important. And that's something that I would pledge to continue to do, and to continue to be aware of and follow any programs and information that I can find to help reduce my own unconscious bias.
Thank you. We are now turning to candidate Diaz.
Thank you. Equity and unconscious bias I see as a generational issue. Most of us grew up in a different time when the standards of conduct were different and the way and were accepted. And we need to grow and realize that that type of thinking isn't going to happen and needs to evolve and become more modern. I think it starts with our schools, it starts with our businesses, it starts in our community, for seeing people as they are, for having an outward mindset and an outward view of how people are and the issues that they're facing on a different day. Put someone's shoes on and walk a mile in those shoes, and you will have you'll learn about what it's like to be in that community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Shantz Hiscott.
Thank you very much. I absolutely agree that the unconscious bias starts with each of us. The responsibility is within each of us to do the work, to do the reading, to do the thinking, to do the asking questions and talking to people of all walks of life, if you will. In my day job, as I call it, at the Falls Church Education Foundation, one of the 3 pillars of our foundation is focusing on equity of access. And equity of access is access to education, to health, to food, to what you need to be able to succeed in school and in life most effectively. I've spent a lot of time working with Alliance for Youth, working on Black Lives Matter and social justice issues with our students. And I really have learned so much from the next generation. And I would be remiss in not mentioning my children, who check my biases on the daily, on the reg, as they would say. I have children in the LGBT community, and they're continually providing me insights on how to better represent them and their peers, as well as other identities within our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're on to question 5 about climate change. We're going to be starting with Councilmember Snyder. The question is, climate change is clearly upon us and impacting us at the local level with stronger storms, more frequent events, and more flooding. If re-elected, how would you advocate the city to reduce its carbon footprint and minimize the impact of climate change and the specific impacts of locally here in Falls Church?
We need to work individually, locally, regionally, at the statewide level, and nationally. We need a cooperative approach that will move the transportation sector, and I mean all the transportation sector, to zero emission vehicles. And that means school buses, it means transit buses, it means personal cars. We need to address the sources of pollution from buildings, and we're making some progress there, requiring tighter and tighter LEED certification. We need to provide alternatives to motor vehicles, single occupancy vehicles. And again, we're working on that. Bike, pedestrian, bike share, and other things that I've personally worked on are all pieces to this. There's no one single thing we can do, but rather it's a continuous day-to-day effort to look at all areas to see where we can make progress. We've made some, we need to make more. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Whitaker.
I think this ties in with the question about unconscious bias. I think a lot of the transportation infrastructure that has been built has been built for people that are middle and upper class, and it has not been built for people in lower class. If you look, for instance, at I-66 toll roads, it's going to be great if you have a car and you're affluent, but you're going to have very hard time getting out to Gainesville on public transit after 66 is built. I think we need to pay a lot more attention to that. You know, there's a plan right now to put a high performance bus rapid transit system down Route 7. One of the things I'm particularly interested in is seeing that that is done in a way that is going to attract not only the 80%, 81% minorities that currently use buses, but are going to attract people that we might call choice riders. Thank you very much.
Vice Mayor Conley.
Thanks for that question. That is a big issue that Falls Church is facing. And as Councilman Snyder said, it needs to be more than just our 2.2 square mile approach. We're part of something bigger, so we need to work together on that. However, our high school that is having its grand opening on Saturday is net zero ready. It has geothermal heat. It has opportunity for photovoltaic panels on the roof, as well as in other places on that campus. And that can be an amazing demonstration project for other schools in the region, as well as other buildings in our city. So I think we need to take that as an example and imitate that in many other ways. Additionally, the schools just got a grant from Dominion to add electric school buses. So our fleet for school buses, which only go mostly within our 2.2 square miles on a daily basis, will be able to use electric power. And we've also talked about increasing the electric fleet for police vehicles and city vehicles as well.
Thank you. Candidate Diaz.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Councilperson Snyder and Councilperson Connolly, I completely agree with your perspective on this. Yeah, it's locally, it's regionally, it's statewide, it's nationally, it's globally. I like that we're looking to transform some of the city vehicles to electric. School buses and the police vehicles and the other city vehicles could benefit from that because they're only moving around the local area. The LEED certification is great. We should look to have that included in all the future development. And we should also look at renewable energy with solar and perhaps having incentives for the community to increase the solar within the community. I understand we can benefit significantly from that and return power back to the system also. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Shantz Hiscock.
Thank you. I've been working over the past year specifically with staff member Kate Walker. She's our environmental guru on Falls Church City Public Schools, Falls Church government staff, as well as the Environmental Sustainability Council. And we've been working on a climate action plan that'll be presented within the next couple of weeks. I believe it's on schedule for maybe 3 weeks from now. And it's a great package that puts together a lot of the things that the other candidates have been saying about great approaches. But the bottom line in climate action is using less, right? So we're using less power for our vehicles, walk more, using less for our buildings, make them LEED Gold, 20% improvement, like our secondary criteria, 20% improvement in energy use, 5% for electric vehicles. You drive fewer miles, you have fewer cars, everything is going to be improving when we use less of it. So stay tuned, there's a lot of detail, a lot of information. Join us at the next council meeting. You can hear from Kate Walker and the Environmental Sustainability Council on a lot of the proposals they have on reducing greenhouse gases and improving our environment here in our 2.2 square miles. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least is candidate Leon.
Thank you, Keith. Yes, so I think approaching this from a commercial perspective, right? When we talk about development in the city, we really need to encourage building of energy efficiency buildings. I think that we do that today. These developers come in ready to do that. But I know that from my experience just in the industry where, Freddie is the biggest backer of multifamily communities, there are incentives out there through tax credits for multifamily housing. And I think it's building awareness of to the developer community how that can be leveraged at the local level. For existing buildings, I think it's the pragmatism of reevaluating if we can keep less lights on at night without sacrificing safety, right, in public buildings. I agree with the statements earlier around moving city vehicles to an electric fleet. And it doesn't hurt to promote, continue to promote or have educational programming on the benefits of biking, and walking, and just reducing our footprint at an individual level. I think we need to continue to do that, reward it, and encourage it, right? As
Keith, are you gonna hit the pause button? Sorry,
Yep,
candidate
I'm
Leanne. The stop sign was up and I thought Keith was gonna say something.
I
Okay,
didn't see
so-
the stop sign. If that was supposed to be flashing before me, I didn't see anything. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we are moving on to the sixth question, which is going to take us to the final iteration of the order of candidates. And this one's going to start with candidate Whitaker. The question is, will you please state your sources of campaign funding? Are there any contributions over $500? Are any contributions from sources outside the city? And we're starting with candidate Whitaker. You're on mute. Can you unmute candidate Whitaker?
No.
No, you can't unmute, or no?
The answer to your question is no.
Okay, to both parts. Are there contributions over $500? Are any contributions from sources outside the city? And the first part of the question said, will you please state your sources of campaign funding? Which is just a summary statement.
I have received no campaign funding for this election. I ran, as all of you may know, I ran 2 years ago. I had, I think, less than $1,000 left over from that campaign. And I think there was a single contribution of $500, but that was the previous election. So the answer in this election is, the answer is no.
Okay, thank you. Next, we are turning to Vice Mayor Connolly.
Okay. Can you just ask the 3 questions again so I get them right?
Sure thing. So the question says, will you please state your sources of campaign funding? Are there any contributions over $500? Are any contributions from sources outside the city?
Got it. So the majority of my campaign funding has come from people who live or work in the city of Falls Church with whom I have lived and worked. For the first time, this is my 3rd campaign. This is the first time I have accepted contributions over $500. And part of the reason why is because it's expensive to run a campaign. So I have one contribution of $500 that came from rockstar realtor Tori McKinney, who is a very good friend of mine. And we work together on a lot of projects. I also have 2 $1,000 contributions. One came from Bob Young, who is the owner of the Young Group, and one came from State Senator Dick Saslaw, who I supported in his previous election. Does that answer all of it?
I think so.
Okay, thanks.
I think so. The second half was contributions from sources outside the city. So only you would know if the answer has been complete. You want another?
Right. I have one contribution from my aunt who lives in Pennsylvania. That's the only one outside the city. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next, we are turning to candidate Diaz.
Thank you. My campaign has one contribution of $500, and that was made by me. I have I've not sought any other funding. And if my family from out of the state wants to send me, $25, and I need it for the campaign, I'll gladly accept it. And I've had people within the community ask me if they could provide me with funding, and I said, right now, no, but I'd actually like you to help me, maybe put some signs around the city and go door to door and talk about this campaign and what I would like to bring to the city.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to turn to Councilmember Shans Hiscott.
Thank you. A summary statement of the source of funding for my campaign. All the funds that I've received have been from good friends and people I've worked with in Falls Church City over the past 25 plus years. $500 and above. That's what we said, right? Not 501. $500 I've received from Tori McKinney, who I've worked with for Tinner Hill for years, and $1,000 from June and Mike Byer. June and Mike have been neighbors for 25 plus years, and we've done a lot of social justice work together, June and I. And the third is from Bob Young of $1,000. Bob Young was one of the original founders of the Falls Church Education Foundation, and is a supporter of a lot of the work that I have done through the Education Foundation as well. And with regard to anything that's outside of the state or outside of Falls Church City, my parents have donated $100, I believe it was, to my campaign. And they haven't yet, but my book club I've been a part of for 25 years, I would probably also receive some donations from those friends that are around the DMV, but may not live in Falls Church City. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're turning to candidate Leanne.
Yes, with the exception of my mother, who lives in Woodbridge, all of my sources of campaign funding come from Falls Church City residents, neighbors, families that I've coached teams for and are friends with. There are contributions over 500. For me, only includes one, and that's from Bob Young. And outside of the city, yes, just family. My mother. That's it.
Thank you.
I
Thank you.
think that was all three.
I
Yes.
think you're done. You still have time if you're done.
Yeah, this was nice
Okay.
and short and sweet for me.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't trying to cut you off because Barb hasn't held up the sign yet. Okay, thank you. We're going to turn to Councilmember Snyder.
Sure, thanks a lot. So my campaign is self-funded by my family and me. I probably have one or two other contributions from citizens of Falls Church. They're way under $100 each. And I've received no money from anyone with economic interests in the city of Falls Church, and no contributions from outside the city of Falls Church either. I guess I should ask my brother, who's in Tennessee, to make a contribution, but I didn't want to be turned down. So in any event, no, seriously, it's all self-funded, and a couple citizens way under $100 each, and no contributions from anyone with any economic interest in the city of Falls Church. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Keith for the next question.
At this point, we're going to move to the questions that have been provided from the audience. And so we'll ask Sabina to turn on the camera and your microphone and address some of those questions, and we may come back. So.
Great, thank you. So the first question, there was two questions related to affordable housing, so I'm going to put them together. One question was, do you think decreasing the share of the city that is zoned for single family housing would be a way to increase affordable housing? The second question related to affordable housing was an observation that most affordable dwelling units so far in the city have been in apartments and condos with few or no children. Would you support townhouse affordable housing units that could bring more diversity to schools? Thank you.
And we're going to start with Vice Mayor Connolly.
Thanks. So on the second question first, that the affordable housing that we have has mostly been in apartments or condos. That's because that's what we're building. The last time we did have townhouses built in Falls Church, it was over on Hillwood in the townhouses right there. And there are several townhouses there that are affordable within that development. But we haven't had a townhouse development in Falls Church since then, which is 20 years or so. So if there was indeed a proposal to put in a townhouse development, I would definitely support adding affordable housing there. And then as far as decreasing or changing the zoning, that's that is a huge question within the country right now. How do you add affordable housing, and do you maintain single family home zoning, or do you change it? And that's something that we as a city need to explore. Some people think it's a great idea and some people think it's a terrible idea. And I actually am not going to make any commitment one way or the other because I feel like I need to know more about how that would affect the city, but I think it's something definitely worth exploring.
Candidate Diaz.
Thank you. Yeah, looking at the city development plan that's posted on the website, the development along Broad and Washington is primarily for these large multi-story apartment complexes. The development really hasn't focused on any townhomes but there may be some condos in the West Falls Church area. Most of those housing units are gonna have some 2 and 3 bedroom apartments that are going to be affordable. Primarily, they're going to be single family. And then as far as the changing the zoning, I think it'll be very, very hard to do. Just me personally looking at the city, the lots are relatively small, and I don't see how unless there's tear downs and then building new multifamily housing units on those on that property, there'd be a way to do that. So that would be probably the only way if a developer wants to do a tear down on a larger lot and then put in a duplex or something like that. That's just what I see right now. Thank you.
Councilmember Sean Hiscock.
Thank you. I am very interested in seeing what's happening out west in LA area with regard to changing the zoning for single family housing. I don't think we'll be leading in that because it's already happening, but I do think it'll be very interesting to watch and see how that impacts the city. It impacts their school, their systems, et cetera, from a financial perspective, but also from a social perspective in terms of the shortage of housing and to see what we can provide there. I'm also a fan of a lot of what's happening in Alexandria and Arlington with regard to affordable housing and developing ADUs, having ADUs within a house, granny flats behind a house, looking at townhouses, duplexes, quadplexes, all kinds of looking at different ways for the missing middle for our housing. I think there's a lot that we can do. Of course, we need to look at it in terms of parking and transportation, environmental impact, the number of students that we'll bring into the schools. But I think in order to diversify economically, we need to provide different types of housing. And that includes the whole spectrum of it, whether that's changing zoning, which is not going to happen in Falls Church City anytime soon. But we can make some of the other changes like our nearby neighbors are doing very effectively to provide additional types of housing. Thank you.
Candidate Leon.
Yes, absolutely. In concept and changing zoning would be great, but coming from deep in the trenches in the current hat that I wear, we at Freddie Mac are taking this on and doing some pilots that are taking a massive amount of coalition building. So, in the interim, as we take a look at how other areas that are like ours nationally are progressing in that front, I do think that I'd be open to townhouses as affordable units. I think we need a supply that fits the whole gambit, right? For the city to be open to all income levels, we're going to need the studios, the 1 bedrooms, the 2 bedrooms, the duplexes, the condos. And so I'd totally be supportive of townhouse affordable units.
Thank you. Councilman Snyder.
Sure. So I got my start in public life here with the Falls Church Housing Corporation that manages the Winter Hill, the 80 ADUs at Winter Hill, and I've supported the ADU policies as we've progressed and made them better over time. I think we need more condos as a way to build wealth. And after all, rentals are great, but part of what I want to do is help lower income people build wealth, move up the ladder so that they can contribute more and have greater opportunities. With regard to single family zoning, I think we should be cautious. I think we should engage the community. I favor walking before we try to run in that area. Think about maybe making it easier for accessory dwellings so you could have multiple generations living in the same basic area. But my fear is if we go too fast and we don't engage the entire community, we'll actually divide this community over the issue of affordable housing. And so I favor exactly what I said, movement toward more condos and going cautiously in the discussion and debate, starting perhaps with accessory dwellings in the single family zoned areas. Thank you.
Thank you. And Candidate Whitaker.
So one of the reports that I've seen suggests that about 75% of the residential lots in the United States are zoned single family. And I think that's a significant impediment to affordable housing. And I certainly favor reducing those restrictions here in Falls Church City with ADUs and with upzoning. I also support the application of affordable housing in townhomes and condos as well.
Thank you. Sabina, we're ready for the next candidate
Sure. So the next group
question from the public.
Sure. The next group of questions we got relates to speeding. So one question was whether you support reducing speed limits. The question goes on to ask, what, if so, why do you think that would be effective given people ignore current speed limits? The second question was more specific, related to late night speeding on East Broad. And the person said, you know, they've tried to engage with City Council on this, but maybe there hasn't been enough in the budget to really deal with the problem. And if you were elected, what would you do to address the high speeds on East Broad, especially late at night? Thank you.
Great. We're starting with Candidate Diaz.
Thank you. In my neighborhood, I see speeding up and down the street all the time, inside school hours, outside school hours. Very cognizant of that. Reducing the speed limits won't necessarily solve that. It's about enforcing the speed limits. A couple ways to do that could be to have speed tables or speed bumps on some of these roads, or do other things that could make force the drivers to drive at a slower speed. Perhaps the city could invest in speed cameras that could be set up at mobile ones that could be set up and that could be used to ticket speeders through a speed camera. And we just need to protect the children and the people who are out there. It's very unfortunate that we're in such a rush now and we're getting back to work that we're seeing all this speeding. Thank you.
Councilmember Shawns Hiscott.
Thank you. I do support and have supported the reduction in speed limits. The ones that we're talking about in Falls Church City would not impact Broad Street. There's a map you can check out on the city's website to see which streets would be potentially impacted by that reduction in speed limit. However, as we've discussed, it's only one tool in the toolkit, if you will. That's enforcement is absolutely critical. Education and understanding where we're going to lower them, understanding that we will be ticketing and enforcing, at least through a warning system. I know some social justice advocates have provided a lot of data about those who are pulled over disproportionately of minorities, but I still think that we need to enforce and remind those that are speeding that that we won't accept it. It's unsafe in Falls Church City. And then when we can legally use speed cameras, I would be in favor of doing that as well. So thank you very much. Oh, just the last thing on speed bumps, we also won't be adding speed bumps on Broad Street. I know people are concerned about that. I can't imagine that we would add that as a traffic calming on the main streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Leon.
Yes, on this topic, I do agree that this is a multi-level approach, right? Reducing those speed limits alone won't do it. And I'm a big proponent of more active engagement and awareness through big flashing signs, that say, how fast you're going, in addition to cameras. I think enforcement of that through those two ways will definitely help and kind of manage the the cost impact of trying to enforce it for the safety of the public citizens, but getting that message across. So creative ways like that to support enforcement definitely is needed to keep pedestrian safety here as a high priority. Thank you.
Thank you. We're on to Councilman Snyder.
Thank you. Well, let me run through the key factors here. And as I can tell you, as an emergency medical technician for most of my life, I've seen way too many people seriously injured or killed in motor vehicle crashes. So it's a very personal thing for me. First of all, we need the laws in place, and I support using whatever flexibility the state legislature has given us, including lowering the speed limit to 20 miles per hour. Secondly, enforcement, absolutely essential. Every budget, I ask the city manager, are we adequately funding our police to take care of all of our public safety issues? And the answer always comes back, yes, and I'm going to keep on that. We need the enforcement clearly. We need to use whatever technology the legislature allows us. Virginia is very restrictive on red light running cameras and very restrictive on speed enforcement cameras only in our school areas. So I would use every capability I have. Education is clearly a part of that. Signs and other things, making clear that when you come into the city of Falls Church, we have laws and we're going to enforce them for the benefit of our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, and candidate Whitaker.
There's of course a lot of concern about gun violence in the United States, but annually the deaths from automobiles are approximately 3 times the homicides, the deaths from gun homicides. It is clearly an incredible problem that needs to be addressed. I appreciate Mr. Snyder's point about the restrictions that the municipalities such as Falls Church City have in terms of use of speed cameras and red light cameras. I would favor working with the state legislature and trying to get that raised, because I think enforcement is very, 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 very important. And I support reduction in speed limits in the city as well.
Thank you. We're ready for our next question from the public.
No, I didn't go.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Do we really have to hear from you?
I'm ready. I was so ready for the answer though.
Thank you.
I agree that speeding is a problem, and we do have some new tools that the General Assembly has given us in the past year. One of them is to reduce and put out more warnings around schools for reducing speed limit there, and then the other one is to reduce speed limit in residential areas. Unfortunately, Broad Street doesn't qualify as a residential area. And Falls Church used to have a reputation as being the place where you always got tickets when you went through. And in recent years, that reputation is not the same anymore. And I do think we need to step up our enforcement, and we need to let people know that it's not acceptable to speed down Broad Street. They also are speeding on Route 66, which isn't in our jurisdiction at all, but we've heard complaints about that as well. And apparently that's a new thing to do in a pandemic, is to speed at nighttime. So I do think we need to address all of that and make our streets safer for pedestrians and for drivers, because we have this giant road right through the middle of our town, and we need to not make it be a river, but actually a connector.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Now we're ready for our next question from the public.
Thank you. So a question came in about budget trade-offs, that many of the priorities you all described, require funding. How will you prioritize and deal with budget trade-offs?
And we're starting with Councilmember Shans Hiscott.
That's a really good question that will require way more than 2 minutes to answer, but I'll do my best to describe how I would address trade-offs. Because
And we're only actually giving you one.
Oh, 1 minute. Okay, and I just wasted 15 of them. The balancing the priorities between health and safety, COVID health and safety of our citizens, whether that's a police force, mental health, health on our streets and in our homes. I think that those will always take priority for me. Schools will also take top notch there. That said, we've spent a lot of our capital budgets. We've improved many of our schools and our library and our city hall over the past few years. So I think that a lot of our capital funding can be spent on areas that will support affordable housing and environmental topics. So they're all important. It is a tough balancing act. We've invested heavily in schools and library, and I think it's time to prioritize alongside those environmental and affordable housing issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Leon.
Yeah, so I'm gonna break that up from two aspects, you know, from an operating budget and then from a SIF perspective. I think from a SIP view, the prioritization there should be around infrastructure, right? Stormwater, maintaining, you know, parks and our recs and what makes the city, you know, special. We don't want it to become a Roslyn, right? So I think that from an operating budget perspective, we want to continue to fund our schools, but we also want to make sure that they understand, you know, fiscal accountability there, right? And not expect year-on-year increases every year. And so in addition to that, I think we need to fund from the operating budget, you know, funding salaries, right? We can't provide the city services that we provide, you know, without competitive compensation. I think part of doing that will support efficiencies and it'll benefit us, right, in the form of public services, et cetera, that we all consume here.
Thank you. We're on to Councilman Snyder.
Well, the first thing I want to try to do, and part of our collective participation in regional bodies is, yes, to help the region, but also to bring resources back here to support our locally tax-funded efforts. So over the course of the years, I've been able to bring in about $40 million in grants for our various transportation projects, bike share, WOD trail, et cetera. So a key part of making the compromises you have to make every budget is to try to maximize the amount of non-city revenue that we have to put in the mix. So that's always been one of my priorities. Second priority is we have to keep in mind that we need to remain competitive as a small jurisdiction, and so far we are. And the City Council collectively was able to reduce our tax rate 3.5 cents. So maintaining fairness for the taxpayers is very important. Finally, I believe that we need to put our money on fundamental government services, schools, public safety, and infrastructure are right at the top for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Candidate Whitaker.
Thank you. There's a Harvard economist who says one of the things that distinguishes the United States from a lot of other economically developed countries is that we typically don't use cost benefit analysis on infrastructure investments. And obviously he doesn't say that positively. It's a problem. We need to make certain that we do provide good analysis of the projects that we're looking at, that they're realistic assumptions that are provided. And I'm particularly concerned with the prospect of literally billions, if not trillions of dollars in infrastructure dollars being released from the federal government, that we need to pay very, very close attention to what's done. And again, so Falls Church is going to get some small portion of that. But again, I see this election as involving, of course, not just Falls Church City, but a number of other regional bodies that Falls Church is represented on.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Conley.
So this question was about how do you balance budget priorities? And we have done a really good job of that in the last few years. I've been the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee for 6 years. And one of the things we did was bring in the school superintendent, school board chair, and school board vice chair as members of that committee. So it's a joint working group of our two bodies that spend the money in Falls Church. And we meet throughout the year and discuss what our priorities are so that there aren't any surprises as we go along. And yeah, there are always trade-offs, Art. It's something always has to give because you only have a certain amount of money. So maybe the trade-off one year is we're going to reduce the tax rate, and that means we won't be able to fund some things. But the trade-off the next year is we can't reduce the tax rate because we need to add more staff in certain areas. So it's a balance, and it's a multi-year balance, and a lot of it is successful because of good communication between the schools and general government on how to best spend the money that we have.
Thank you. And last is candidate Diaz.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm sitting here next to a copy of the 322-page Falls Church adopted budget for the fiscal year 22. And by looking at it, yeah, you can see the trade-offs that were made and the things that have to go into balancing your budget and meeting the needs of the community. We should continue with the shovel-ready projects. So when Falls Church is offered money, say from Amazon or Google or other state or local funds or federal funds, we can move out and use that money for that list of to-dos that we have for the community, and I think that's a good way. When we look at our schools, we spend about 60% of our city budget on the schools, and we need to make sure our schools are accountable to that big pot of money that they get, and that we're using that, they're using it efficiently and effectively, and seeing if they can find ways that they can save money and then bring that back for smaller projects within the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're headed towards the end of our sessions now. And what we're going to do is allow 90 seconds for each candidate to provide closing statements. You can make a rebuttal on something that you may have heard earlier, or you could clarify one of your earlier answers. And with this, we're starting with candidate Leon.
I just want to close by reiterating how thankful I am, to participate in this. I have served in the city through the PTA and Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, and I've served on boards in DC and Northern Virginia. I've resigned from those boards to actually focus and channel all this energy at the local level. I appreciate your consideration and really look forward to participating to solve some unique challenges and opportunities we have. Again, education, affordable housing, as well as balanced development is where I hope to bring some of my prior business background and personal experience to the table to help improve the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Snyder.
Well, thanks for everyone who's put together this program, everyone who's listening. I especially want to thank all the other candidates. This is one of the few places in this country, indeed in this world, where folks like us can gather and have the opportunity to give back to our communities in an elected capacity. So this community is an incredible, wonderful thing built up over decades of really hard work. To the extent that I can contribute to maintaining that and meeting our new challenges, that's why I continue to be interested in working with this community in an elected capacity. I think that as we move forward, we have the values in place. We have, and I'm absolutely convinced, regardless of who wins this election, that we will have the people in place. And with the support of this community, We're maybe number 3 right now, according to US News and World Report, out of 3,000 communities, but we're going to be number 1 within the next 4 years. And if I can play even a small role in that, it's a great blessing and honor for me to do that. Again, thank you for everyone who has participated in any way in this, in the electoral process, and especially the League of Women Voters and the Village Preservation and Improvement Society. You know what it takes to make a great community and to pass that community on to the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Whitaker.
Thank you. I want to echo Mr. Schneider's comments. I appreciate everybody's effort, the League of Women Voters and VPIS. I appreciate the candidates that are in here today. I appreciate everybody who's watching out there in internet land. I think that there's a lot of differences reflected in the current members of the city council and of the current candidates. And to me, that's an indication of strength. We need diversity. We need people to come in with different ideas, different perspectives. I think Falls Church City is a terrific place. It's a wonderful place. The only reason I'm running is to try and make it better. I think we're facing an existential threat in terms of climate. I think in terms of social justice, these are issues that we've faced for hundreds of years. I would like to be able to play a part in addressing those. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Connolly.
Thanks. Serving on city council has been one of the greatest honors and challenges of my life. It is something that I think about all the time, and there are so many things to learn and do. So I do want to thank the Village Preservation and Improvement Society, the League of Women Voters for putting this on, all of you for attending on a Thursday night. And also, I really want to thank the people in this community that get involved and do things for years and years and years and learn about what's going on, what makes our city better. We get so many amazing comments going forward on all of the different projects from people who are paying attention, who understand, who have been on boards and commissions, and you all make such a huge difference. And that also is really rewarding to represent you and to hear from you. So I ask for your vote. Please vote for me. The polls are open now through November 2nd, and I look forward to continuing to serve. And we have a lot more work to do, and that's we've done a lot and we have much more to do. And I really would like to be part of that, representing all of you. Thanks.
Thank you. Candidate Diaz.
Yes, thank you again to the Falls Church Village Preservation and Improvement Society and to the League of Women Voters for hosting this. Thank you for the candidates and for the participants in the community who attended this Zoom meeting. It's about participating in the democratic process and serving your community in the capacity of which you're able to. That makes our community stronger and our nation stronger. So I thank you for those of you who have been city council members for your service to us, and I look forward to perhaps replacing one of you in the future and carrying forward the development of this community and making it a better place to live for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Shantz Hiscott.
Thank you so much. At risk of being redundant, I too thank everybody who's participating in this democratic process. To those who take the time to put these forums together and promote them and encourage participation, I just think we're all the better for it. So thank you to everybody involved. I appreciate it. I'd also like to, I just feel like I just did this. I did it a year ago, but it feels like yesterday. So I just want to thank those of you who put me into office in 2020. I've worked very hard to build upon the 25 years of collaboration and bonds and relationships I've created within the city to try to serve you all as best as I can. I've learned a lot. I felt like I knew a lot coming in, but there is still so much more to learn. And I just feel like I'm getting started. I really look forward to the opportunity to continue working on some of the things that we've been focused on this past year on City Council, in addition to trying to help with COVID relief and managing ARPA funds. focusing on the environment, focusing on affordable housing, focusing on equity, and making sure all are welcome to come live, work, and enjoy what the little city has become over the past 25 years I've lived here. So thank you for the opportunity, and I too hope that you'll vote to re-elect me any day or between now and November 2nd, essentially. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're back to Allison from the League of Women Voters.
Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. And I really encourage everybody to get out and vote. We have the election for the Commonwealth positions, as well as our very important local election. So I hope you've all learned a lot tonight about the candidates that are running for City Council. And please participate in a week when we hear from the school board candidates. Thank you very much and good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.